A warm welcome to all the listeners and viewers today. Today is the second panel of our B2B evening, and my colleague Anirvan will be leading and moderating this. Just wanted to thank, first of all, our guests who have come in, and wanted to briefly introduce them. To my right on the top is Jay in the blue t-shirt. Jay, welcome, Jay. Um,
Here.
from the Bay Area, just below him, Tony Wang, the founder and CEO of Agora, also from the Bay Area, and our very own Asad of Lambda Test here in Delhi, somewhere in the world, but based between Delhi and California. Wanted to just start off with brief intros, and then I'm going to turn it over to Anirban. I'll start with Tony. Tony, wonderful to have you with us. For those of you who just need a little more detail, Tony is co-founder and CEO of Agora.io, which is a public company with a market cap of greater than 6 billion US, and has really been a pioneer in the real-time technology space, RTE, constantly pushing that barrier. Interestingly, we are happy that Blume is a long-term partner of the Agora Startups program, and I know, Tony, you're very involved in that. Fun fact, we're also discovering that you know more about India than some of us do, and were quizzing us about Hindi movies that we had not seen. So thanks for joining this panel, Tony.
My pleasure.
Jay has known Blume almost before we started, and it's quite appropriate. 10 years ago, we've known Jay from his SAP Ventures days and before he co-founded Sapphire Ventures. Jay's been investing for about 2 decades. He's got 13 IPOs, 15 acquisitions, and has made more than 50 investments. One of the best track records among the SaaS investors out there. Some of Jay's investments are Box, MuleSoft, Apigee, Paytm, Just Dial, back home. Quite interesting that you've got your India connection going back a long way. JFrog, Nutanix, and most recently also Segment that was acquired by Twilio. So would really look forward to hearing your insights here, Jay. And last but not the least, our very own Asad, right here, co-founder and CEO of Lambda Test. And Lambda has, besides Blume, also raised funding from Leo Capital and from Sequoia. And Asad is building a global company out of Delhi, NCR, and California, and very, very passionate about putting the power of innovation into the hands, and is a big champion for the global developer community, and really a recipient of what's happening in 2020. Great to have you here, Asad, and share your passion and energy and vision with us on the panel. And Asad's also a 2x serial entrepreneur. Earlier ran 360 Logica, which was then acquired by Saxoft. So welcome to all of you, and we'll turn it over to Anirvan from here.
Thanks, Sanjay. Thanks a lot, Jay, Tony, and Asad, for joining us to discuss consumerization of the enterprise. We couldn't have asked for a better panel to discuss this topic. Also, welcome everyone who's joined us. Please keep posting your questions in the Q&A section, not in the chat. And we've set aside 15 minutes in the end to bring you into the panel and ask your questions. So let's get started. So Jay, you've been investing in the enterprise for the past 20 years, almost every category of software. Companies as diverse as MySQL and Clary, right? During this period, something really interesting has happened. And essentially, there's been a transition of the buyer profile. It initially used to be sales-led, driven to sold to the CIOs, and now it's product-led, sold to the end users. Would love to understand what has changed over the years from a tech point of view, from a design point of view, from an end user behavior point of view, and a distribution point of view, to bring about consumerization of the enterprise. I would also love to understand what product-led growth means to you and your portfolio.
Yeah. Look, fundamentally, I think, as you guys have called it, the consumerization of the enterprise has happened, right? We started talking about this probably at least, 5, if not even longer ago, where people are like, hey, we are using Google, we are using Facebook, we're using all of these things, and why is our software that we use is so outdated and so clunky and so hard to use, right? So I think, UX and UI over time for enterprise software became really, really critical. And one of the interesting stats out there was that it used to be in any enterprise software development team, There used to be like maybe 6 or maybe even 10 developers to one UX UI person. And nowadays, if you look at it, that ratio, I think in some companies is 1 to 1, and some of the forward-looking companies actually more UX UI developers or focus for people than actual developers in there, right? But what has also happened as people realize this, I think fundamentally for investors, the whole mode of investing and kind of go to market started changing, right? Just like people on the consumer side figured out ways to get to the folks through social media or through some kind of advertising. But they all realized, even in enterprise software, just like that, people realized that you can maybe use some of those same mediums, right? Like we have enterprise software companies advertising on Twitter, advertising on LinkedIn, advertising sometimes even on Facebook and TikTok and things like that nowadays, right? But fundamentally, what you still have to do, the product still has to work and be good, right? Because if you develop something and you cannot provide value to the end customer, and that might be a developer. Actually, if you're doing developer tools, it might be the sales and marketing lead. It might be somebody, the product manager. But if you cannot provide, when they come to your product and use it, in the first 15 to 20 minutes, you've lost that customer. They're not going to come back, right? And that kind of mantra that we have been saying has made it really, really, kind of a focus for most of our product-led growth companies. And the other interesting thing that has happened because of the whole focus on product-led growth is that your cost of acquisition is much more what you can call controllable or predictable, right? Because now you can actually have metrics to see, when people come in, what is their journey on your product? When do you have to have an SDR jump in and kind of say these are the functionalities and maybe start doing a POC? So it becomes very predictable, which is great for investors, because if you have a very predictable go-to-market model, you can then come in and say, okay, we know if we give you $1 and you spend $1, how much revenue you're going to get out of it. And that has actually helped us as investors, saying that, hey, we want to back these product-led growth companies because their revenues is much more SaaS-like, predictable, rather than really based on these big deals that enterprise, large sales or focused enterprise software companies do. So I'll stop here, right? And we can go further into it. But overall, I would say that the last thing I'll say is that most of my companies that have started out as top-down CIO-focused sales are all really, really focusing now on developing a self-service product and go the product-led growth route.
Very interesting, Jay. So you pointed out a great UI UX, what we've seen in our consumer products that we use getting transferred. You pointed out social being used as go-to-market, the cost of acquisition being predictable, and hence the revenues being predictable. But very interesting that you pointed out the value to the end user. So to Tony, what you built with Agora is absolutely inspiring. But what's more interesting is the way you've ingrained developer centricity into your DNA. I've read about you opening up your APIs and SDKs even before you were making any revenue. So how did you go about identifying the core problems of developers and implementing a culture of having obsession with end user problems? It could be developers, it could be product managers in your case. Please take us through what was the strategy back in 2013 and the journey of implementing it. It'll be wonderful for the audience to learn from that.
Sure, yes. Thank you very much for having me. So we actually didn't think of, it was not like developer were thinking, it was a fact that we noticed that more and more camera on the mobile phone, right? You start from Nokia functional phone with a very low resolution, and the camera start to get in high resolution. And then you have front and back camera, and then you have 2 back camera. And now like iPhone, you have like a 5 camera. That is, if you have camera, you can do something with it, right? It's like you give kid a toy, he's gonna play it, right? So that's where we realize the embedded audio, the audio and video is probably going to be very interesting, right? It's a consumer behavior. It's a consumer behavior shift that people is moving into. So then you think about, okay, if I'm going to, capture that word, that basically you have decided, were there going to be one Skype back in the days, right? One Skype to rule them all, or it's going to be a lot of different Skype that integrate into their user experience in the different culture, different setting, right? And the answer is, you know what? We believe it's going to be embedded. We believe the whole communication is going to be embedded experience. And it's very easy to understand actually for us, for our who live in the Eastern culture. I mean, for example, if you go to eat in an Indian restaurant, you're gonna put the rice, something down below, and you put some topping on top, right? This is very normal, right? This is embedded, right? Now, imagine, let's say you order a noodle. Noodle has soup, noodle, and some topping. You're like, all right, I'm gonna drink soup first. I'm gonna eat topping, and then I'm gonna eat all the flowers noodles, right? That does not make sense for us, but that is currently what it is we're using right now, Zoom, right? Basically, you do something on a different application and you come here for communication, right? So 7 years ago, we believe that experience will be embedded. I'm not saying there will be no use case that is pure communication. There will be for sure, right? But more use case would be embedded into the workflow, right? Whether it's a consumer context, let's see where we in something like I don't know, education, or something like share chat, or like Clubhouse, like that getting very popular apps, right? So I think that embedded experience is very important. And then you think about, okay, if I'm going to sell into those embedded experience, who are the people that is going to build, right? And here I actually wanted to expand the term developer. The term developer used to refer to somebody can code, right? I actually want to include product people. I actually want to include the product people that is define the user experience, and to what Jay said, the UX, right? The UI UX very important, right? I want to include the product people who is able to identify the problem and create the flow that makes sense for that particular problem and workflow, and be able to basically articulate in the visual way and for programmer to implement, right? So those people are important, right? It happened to be in the early phase, it's actually developer, but I think as a B2B company, you have to constantly facing that thing, right? I mean, some of those cases are decided by the decision makers, right? For example, in a large corporation, like a sports entertainment, right? There's always decision maker that said, "Oh man, I saw this thing. We should be doing this for our fans," right? And then they go down to the innovation officer, CTO, product people, then programmer. So but some startups, programmer will basically do some search and ask his friend in YC, or ask his friend from whatever startup that is in India and say, "Hey, what are you using? I mean, what's good out there," right? So I think the term for programmer is also much bigger, right? So that's how we started. We start from consumer trend, and we decide where this trend will be going, like what kind of format was going to be SaaS, it's going to be embedded, or it's going to be like Skype, like a B2C app, right? And then we decide who might be the people using it, right? So we need to influence those people for that decision and then make it easy for them.
Yeah. Wow, very fascinating, Tony. So you picked on a consumer behavior shift and try to figure out what the second order effects are going to be, and how it's going to be delivered to the consumer, and identify the embedded experience being one of the most important points. Asad, I'm sure a lot of the points, and also you expanded the term developer, right? I think, Asad, a lot of those points would resonate strongly with you. So in a lot of ways, you're bringing about the left shift, right? Um, um, you bring about a paradigm shift in the way testing is done, right? You're targeting the entire 30 million strong developer and testing community through a left shift that's happening. But we are very curious to know, when you are adopting a product-led growth strategy, it's imperative to ensure minimum friction for the end user and first experiencing the product to maximize acquisition, having value-added features behind a paywall to drive expansion, revenue expansion, and having the right integrations in place to maintain good retention. Tell us, how did you and the Lambda team go about implementing this, and what does product-led growth mean to you all at Lambda?
Sure. Thank you for having me today. Glad to be here. And as Jay actually explained that UI and UX is very important when you are putting your product online in front of too many people you don't know. I mean, if you navigate 10, 15 years back, I used to work for a wealth management enterprise product on premise. You're dealing with maybe 1,000, 2,000 users, actually, wealth manager, desktop advisors, they are going to use the product. But and that is completely a relationship based sales, and you have influence on the users because you are have a foot on the ground, dealing with them directly in controlled environment. You are putting your product in front of the users. There it was not that important how your UX and UI looks like. Definitely better will work more. But when you are launching a product in front of too many audience, like globally, customer is not going to revert you if they don't like the product. They'll bounce immediately, and the experience is super important. So from visit to sign up and the first experience of the user, if the time is as much as short it can be, that kicks off the product led growth immediately. I mean, the first experience,
Very
user
true.
from visit to the website and hits the sign up, and the first launch of the service, first call of the API, or first instance spinning up, any such experience, and that we decided inside the lambda test that it should not be more than 2 minutes. In any case, any smart user should be able to hit the first experience and ready to hit the paywall as well. So this kind of the theme we are working on in the lambda task, that any product, even our enterprise shift left that is coming on board, even in that case, can we make their life so easy that it is not exceeding more than 5 minutes? Can they spawn the can they integrate our repo and run the test on container within 5 minutes, plug and play, and integrate at the same time? So the experience becomes super important, and you're interacting with all the users who are actually hitting the wall. And this is where the first point of product led growth starts. And the second is that how your users are evangelizing the product in the community. That becomes very important. uh, you're not selling to one user. Actually, you're selling, there's a cascading effect. I mean, you sell one person and they start selling among the group, and then start talking about the social media and community. Okay, I found something, I built something out of it, and this is how it is working. People are so many trends on the social media. You go and people are launching that. What is their year? The best choices of the tool of the year. Actually, you see a lot of trends come in, and people start talking about your tool or the product, that how they're using it. So the evangelism, experience, and your ecosystem integration plays a huge role. And how you start with, and how you introduce one by one, that becomes very important overall, which we are actually going through during the execution in Lambda.
Very cool. Very cool, Asad. So you're talking about you want the end user to derive value before you can derive revenue from them. Unless they derive value, there's no point in even trying to derive revenue. So that's very interesting. You spoke about evangelism. Asad, 14 million plus tests, 500,000 developers on your platform that have used your platform. Seems like you are mastering the art of driving virality and building evangelists for your product. The same way that Tony has and the entire Agora team has. And I'm sure JFrog and many others within Jazz portfolio have. Would love to understand, how did you build this from a community and marketing perspective with limited funding in early years, right? It's quite easy to do it with a lot of funding. Please take our audience through what worked for you and what would you advise early stage entrepreneurs to focus on when they're targeting the developer community.
So low touch funnel, actually building a low touch funnel is time taking process. You got to trust the overall process. It takes like maybe sometimes 6 months or 1 year, and in some cases it might take more time. Actually, there's no playbook. I don't have any particular playbook actually I can introduce right now, but how we actually did it.
What worked for you? Would love to know what worked for you.
How it is working for us, it's very important. The approach that we started taking in, that how the users will come and use the lambda test. Can we open hundreds of doors? User never comes from the front door. It comes from different angles. I mean, can you let your product integrate into WordPress, Magento, Shopify, everywhere? Introduce and let it sit everywhere. It can actually.
Yeah.
And that is not opening the ease of use to our users. This is also opening a GTM funnel along with it. The discovery of the
Absolutely.
product through different doors is something that our right from the beginning was our strategy. And then you start going after traditional, I mean, methods. I mean, the content is king these days. I mean, this is a very broader topic. Actually, we can speak a lot, but the content has played a huge role. That how you figure out what content will work for our community, I mean, the tester community and the developer community, and what they are looking around, where they are hanging out, what kind of discussions they are doing. So you start collecting that trend and start planning short-term plan and the long-term plan on the content hub side, that how they will hit the website and will sign up and will have aha moment when they hit the first experience. So you have to design the whole I mean the cycle around it. It's not only the marketing technique, it's not only the product experience, it's collective experience, that how you design it actually. And then
great,
then the virality starts.
Beautifully put, Asad. Distribute the product where your end users are residing, and also content. And content, I'm sure I've seen the journey, has played a major role in that. I would love to move to you, Jay, at this point in time, and would love to. You've sort of covered it in the past, but in the previous question. But what are the benefits of adopting a consumerization strategy from a valuation point of view? We've seen product-led growth companies trade 50% higher than SaaS companies. What drives this according to you? Touched upon the marginal cost of customer acquisition going down, but we'll have to hear a few examples from your portfolio if possible. I know 13 IPOs, so it may not be possible, but
yeah, look, product-led growth companies, although I will point out that Snowflake, which probably has the highest multiple of an enterprise software company right now, is not really product-led growth company, although they will claim that to be. But in general, I think the reason why companies like like a Datadog or a Zoom or an Agora or a Twilio are kind of trading at these high multiples is because they're much more efficient, right? So that's the two things that the street likes, or Wall Street, or for a public company, is predictable revenues and a very efficient sales model, right? Meaning that they don't mind you spending a lot of money, but they want to see that your sales and marketing costs as a percentage of your growth in revenues is decreasing over time. Now, what all these product-led growth companies are able to do are two things. One, because they're bottoms up, and Atlassian has proven that, for the last 5 or 8 years that they have been public, is that you have a much more predictable revenue because you are not depending on these large deals. You look at somebody like a Palantir or a C3, they're not product-led growth companies, right? They are much more focused on these large deals, and they can have ups and downs in their revenues, and that's why they can't always project very clearly what their growth is going to be. Versus a product-led growth company, they know the metrics, right? They'll know, and there's ARR, and the GAAP revenue always trails ARR. They have a pretty good idea about, okay, what is my growth going to be, even what is my top of the funnel, and so they can predict almost like 2-3 quarters out what their revenues are going to be, right? And that predictability, kind of, with the fact that they're more efficient, in general, gives you more efficient businesses that the street likes, right? So that's kind of partly. And then look, the market is also driven by what sector is kind of, in fashion nowadays, right? DevOps are in fashion, infrastructure is in fashion. So, that you get, security is always in fashion. So you get a premium for that. So it's a little bit of, you might have the best strategy, best kind of model, but you still get not the high multiple because you're in a category that is not that sexy or exciting. But that is why we all want predictable, high growth businesses, and something that is based on product-led growth is the best way to do that.
Fantastic. So predictability, efficiency, thanks to your marginal cost of customer acquisition going down, and many others. So, but a follow-up question to that, Jay. I mean, we have seen SaaS multiples in private markets go all the way up to 100x, and we are seeing the ripple effect on early stage also. To be honest, that freaks us out sometimes. But just curious, how do you rationalize these when you hit the public market? We've seen Snowflake trade at 100x. We've even seen Datadog trade at 40x and above, and JFrog, one of your portfolio companies, trade at 40x and above. But is this sustainable? Do you think SaaS is becoming an asset class in itself? What's happening? I mean, I would love to hear.
So a couple of things.
Is this sustainable?
Yeah. So a couple of things. I think in the private markets, valuations. I always tell our entrepreneurs that valuation is not a mathematical thing that is taught in business school. It's an auction. It's basically supply and demand. And if you are one of the CEOs who's very good at pitching, who's very good at and has a great story in the right space, you will have a lot of demand, and and you will get a really high valuation, right? And what and so basically, when you have a lot of supply of capital, which is currently the case for SaaS companies or for any software companies, and the demand is there, the valuation of course goes up, right? And what has happened is that people are just paying like 2 to 3 years forward. It used to be that, hey, if I invest now, I'm going to base the valuation on what the ARR number is going to be at the end of the year, 12 months forward. People are now paying multiples based on 2 years, 3 years down the road of what that's going to be. So, and the reason is that when you look at it, even at the later stage, people are kind of paying the portfolio kind of theory where, you can invest 100 million in 10 companies, right? So that's $1 billion, right? And you just need one of them to be Databricks or a Snowflake or or a Toast, whatever. And all of a sudden, you have almost could be a 10x fund depending on how much you invested in them, right? So I think that is what, just the way people played in the early stages, where you kind of invest in all of them, one company or one or two companies are going to make the fund. That has actually started happening in the later stages also, and it's partly driven by the size of these markets, right? When we invested in MuleSoft, we never thought that it would be $1 billion revenue company, right? And yeah, it got acceleration because they're part of Salesforce. Twilio, right? The massive scale, or even Zoom, right? You look at it, there are lots of companies before Zoom that were doing video conferencing, and none of them got to the scale that Zoom has gone to. So I think that's the other thing that has happened for public markets, that people see the size of the TAM of these enterprise software companies, and they're like, yeah, even if I pay like $2 billion for a $20-30 million company, if this becomes almost like a 200-300 million over 5 years, yeah, I'll get my money back and get my 3 to 6x return.
Very interesting. The size of market point that you brought up is very interesting, because, and also Twilio, I believe that out of the 60 billion market cap, they've gained that out of that 40 billion very recently in the past year or so. So it all makes sense. People are realizing the value of SaaS.
But Twilio has also grown exceptionally well, right? For a company to grow whatever 50% at the scale they're growing is quite impressive, because typically, if you look at it as companies scale and get larger, their growth rate slows down. But some of these companies are proving that wrong. Even companies like Mongo, right? Like if you look at it, their growth rate actually accelerated over time.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jay. That was a masterclass in valuations, and I'm sure our audience would love for you to come down and talk separately only on that. Tony, I'm sure you're not complaining about the high multiples, but would love to understand, how to strike the right balance. You're powering real-time communication, real-time engagement for a wide array of industry: healthcare, entertainment, education, gaming, social, without naming anyone, insurance, and even robotics, which was very fascinating for me. So would you do you believe a product-led growth strategy or consumerization strategy works for every industry? And are there a few industries where you might have a different strategy? Also, how does one strike the right balance between marketing or sales-led growth, where ACVs tend to be higher because you're targeting the enterprise, versus product-led growth, where ACVs tend to be lower because you're targeting the end user. So how do you strike the right balance? And is there an industry angle to this? Who do you target, etc.?
So I think I hear two questions, and I'll answer one by one. First of all is growth, and that represents my own belief. The second one is how do you basically cap a horizontal machine and capture all the vertical opportunities, right? So first of all, in growth, I am a firm believer that B2B is not bought. You cannot possibly throw money on the problem on a B2B world, right? Your growth only come and can only come from one thing and one thing only is you service your initial customer, right? I mean, once you pass that hurdle, I think then you can add, some toppings, like we add some Parmesan cheese on top of pasta. Growth is marketing, PR, those are all great. Those are Parmesan cheese you add on, but the real growth coming from the word of mouth. We can bragging about ourselves for all we want. Nobody gonna buy into this, right? But it takes one customer said, "Hey, what are you using?" Let's say you run one of the audio, video, social media apps in Southeast Asia, and you're very successful, right? And people asking you, "Hey, what are you using? Are you happy with them?" And you're like, "Oh man, yes, I love them because they help me so much above and beyond." That is all my marketing budget. I'm gonna spend every single penny on that if it's up to me, right? I'm gonna spend every single penny to it, right? And that's why you don't see really a lot. You don't see really a lot of Agora ads in Indian. I mean, hardly any, right? Instead, Ranga and I, we travel India a lot. We basically visiting customers, big and small. To love them, you got to live their world, and that's how I know so much movie about India, right? You got to understand. You got to understand their problem, their education problem, their pain. You cannot sitting in a Silicon Valley office and look at Excel sheet and tell them what is best for them, right? You got to live their life, and for the first three to come, regardless big or small, you are going to make them success. So make your customer success. That is my only marketing growth strategy, right? Period. Everything else is secondary. Is add-on, is secondary, is a zero behind one. But if you imagine I give you a check without the first number as one, I give you a check with 9 zeros, like this is a lot of money. You're like, no, this is not a lot of money. So everything else is a zero. Now, I know there will be professional, especially marketing professional, maybe disagree, right? But I think we can all agree the very purpose of a B2B company is because you can do it better than DIY. You can do it better, you can do it faster, you can do it more efficient, right? Now that goes to the second question, actually. How do you conquer the multi-vertical, right? The SaaS company of the first generation usually focus on one small niche problem, like a payment problem, a DocuSign problem, right? Basically signing, right? But I think in the future, you're gonna facing that either multiple parts of the workflow or multiple verticals, right? And the problem with that is it's actually very hard. It's actually very hard because as you get in deeper and deeper, you going back to a customer, the first problem, your large customer will say, "Hey, I need those features." Well, you said you're gonna help me, you're gonna make me happy. Well, you're gonna customer develop those for me, right? How do you balance it, right? And I think that is why your other one is going to be important, is going to be your product, right? Two type of one is very good at balance priority, assign a very technical. I tend to call those back-end forcing, like develop R&D facing product people. There's also product people, let's say ex-CTO of some kind of company. They understand when customers asking 10 feature, they understand, they actually can discuss. They will be able to say, really, you don't need those 7, right? The 3 is what you need, because other 7, here's a better way of doing this. But that requires, again, you understand the customer business model and their industry and where they are going. So that requires a lot. That can be done, but not easy. Not easy. So as a start, I would say you start from one vertical before you expand into others, right? You mentioned a lot of vertical for Agora, but we don't go into all those at once because that will just kill us, right? We gradually come. I mean, and as also as a market maturity, right? Telemedicine is great, but is that mature? Is the volume, is the revenue there? Probably not, right? So you have to be able to. That's another thing. Go to market, right? Your product people and the product marketing people have to be very. It's almost like a venture capitalist. You have to say, oh, is this industry ready for mature? Because you can't just jump into an industry when you see the biggest news, Secure Capital invest $1 billion into a company. That does not make that vertical mature for you, right? That the vertical mature means you have a very healthy competition going, and that's where, and when people compete, that's where efficiency comes into play. So they want to use your assets, right? So I think so. Prioritize and be able to balance the customization and the SaaS demand. I think those are the 2 very important things as a SaaS company, or in Agora's case, we're a little bit low below SaaS, to be able to balance out where the product, how much you build out, right? And which industry to go in first. That will help you extend horizontally into different verticals using one core product, right?
Very well put, Tony. And I think pearls out there, and what a learning experience this must be for anyone who's building a SaaS company, or for that matter, a product-led growth company. On that topic, I think Jay, I would love to move to you for a topic that I know you're very passionate about. Not only from an investor point of view, back in the day when you were a developer, I'm sure you were very passionate about it. Open source, right? We've seen companies within your portfolio, whether it's MySQL, JFrog, Segment, have a strong open source element to their business. Would love to learn from you how open source can drive consumerization, and obviously it does. And it's pretty much the best product-led growth strategy that one can adopt. But what are the best strategies of developing a strong commercial model when you're building on top of open source?
Yeah. So look, open source, has kind of been around now for, I don't know, about 10, 12, I think it was last in the late mid-90s that the first blog came out about open source, right? But what, as an investor, what I think of open source, it's really a way to market to developers and infrastructure builders, right? So I don't, when you have to use open source, is really about getting your word out about the product. And when you look at infrastructure software companies, there's companies like, I'll take an example, say Kafka and Confluent versus Agora, right? Or Twilio. Agora and Twilio, you didn't really need to have anything open source because, they were solving a problem that was well understood and people were just looking for a better solution, right? Like for Twilio's case, you wanted to have, you didn't want to have connections to multiple service providers or to get the SMS going, and Twilio provided a very nice interface. Agora is doing the same thing. So, you didn't really have to have open source in that mix, right, to get the developers, because they had an existing pain point that they were looking for. Kafka, on the other hand, right, had to be open source because nobody really knew what this whole concept was. They were trying to create a category. They were trying to, kind of educate the market, and that worked really well because a lot of the early adopters kind of became the evangelists who kind of went and said, hey, if you need to architect your application or your solution a certain way, and you have a lot of streaming data coming in from IoT devices, you need to use something like Kafka, right? So that's what open source worked really well for a company like Confluent. But ultimately though, the real adoption of the product still has to come from kind of a SaaS or a managed service version, right? Because I have this belief that developers at the end of the day, are not going to download your open source and run it and manage it. They don't really want to do that. They just want to get their work done. They'd rather have an API that they'll call into and move on. Except for those evangelists who are always the first adopters, who blog a lot, who basically are the influencers on YouTube and TikTok, right? For infrastructure software. So if you are a company that is trying to create, or if you look at, say, Cockroach or a Yugabyte, they need to be open source because they're coming in and saying that, hey, we have a better version of our distributed database than what you would get from Oracle or somebody else, right? So they have to get these influences going, and that's why they have these open source. But the real adoption comes is when you have that SaaS product-led growth ultimately. Like Mongo is a great example, right? It was growing okay when they went public. They did not have their SaaS product like Atlas. Once Atlas came out, the adoption of Mongo kind of skyrocketed. Yeah, it was also, you can also say that people realized that they needed a database like that in their application. Some of that happened. But I would bet that if they had not created the Atlas product, Mongo's growth rates would have actually slowed down and become much slower. So when you are a developer or entrepreneur thinking about starting an infrastructure software company, think about whether open source makes a real difference or not. And these are all rules of thumbs, and I won't say that there is only one way to go to market about these things. But nowadays, even open source companies, like if you look at Starburst or Dremio companies in our portfolio, like as soon as they get adoption, they start building the SaaS offering. Right. So
very interesting. Very interesting. Tony and Asad, while we are on the topic of open source, if you could quickly cover, like open source is not just about having the right protocol or solution, as Jay put it. For Agora, there's WebRTC. For Asad, there is framework like Selenium and Cypress. However, reliable infra and intuitive UI UX is where both of you add a tremendous amount of value. Tell us how both of you went about building these moats, and why did you decide to build on top of open source frameworks in a few cases, right? Not every case, but would love to learn what kind of moats did you build thanks to being open source, and how it drove your consumerization. Tony, would love to hear from you first, and Asad, then we can get to you. Sure. Also, one quick question, Tony. Would you have 10 minutes more for us? I know you've been very generous with your time. If you could, stay for 10 minutes more, then we can open up a Q&A a bit later, because I wanted to cover the India story as well.
Sure, yes. So, first of all,
thank you so much.
we are compatible with WebRTC on the web browser side. But as you know, WebRTC designed for one-to-one in the browser communication. We actually start mobile first, right? So we are actually very different from WebRTC. That's one.
Absolutely.
Number two, but having said that, I think WebRTC as an open source endpoint protocol versus Agora as a network with service, right? That's actually is actually where I believe the open source is going. The very term open source used to labeled as Jedi fights against the tyranny of Microsoft, right? That's when I get on Linux. I feel like a Jedi, right? That's back in the days, right? 2000, right? But I don't think that's anymore, right? Any open source company right now is very hard to differentiate from. If you want to have some influence in the developed community, you got to have support. You got to have a continued road. You cannot be just a random peer-to-peer product network, right? When everybody contribute code in a different skill, and you have 100 versions of your product flying around. So you have a roadmap, you have a professional body, you have a service, you have a guarantee, and those people need to get paid, right? So I think open source is a very strong component. I almost think this as the source of inspiration, right? It's where the MVP. When the MVP is being done, right? When the Spock, when NoSQL was first coming out, I think it's in the open source form, right? Because that's easy, so everybody start to contribute. It's open source, so it's source of inspiration. It's a format of request for comments, right? It's a crowdsourcing format of request for comments, and then you get commercial. You get more and more commercial value, importance, then commercial bodies start to encompass around that, and then you continue building moving forward. So I would say open source and commercial is two legs of one person right now. You cannot live without each other, and it's go together. I don't think it's a conflict. I think it's a part of the how ecosystem is evolve forwarding, right? You need both to moving forward. So that's basically my view.
Interesting. Open source and commercial being the two legs of one person. Asad, would love to hear from you quickly, and then we would love to move to the India story. Last couple of questions after that, and then we'll open it up for Q&A.
I agree. I agree with Jay and Tony, and they bring a lot of experience in this discussion about the open source. Uh, and I also agree that there's no playbook. I mean, which model you can go with actually. You have to look into landscape and then figure it out. For us, I mean, I can tell you only about what we are doing actually. We have Selenium community on board, and we wanted to build a infra automation product where actually you can provide the test execution on fly. And there's no point to build another testing tool which is having 92% penetration in the market and then go and head on with them. I mean, that's like a suicide actually. I mean, we cannot do it. So we decided that, I mean, build on top of open source community that not only provides you a platform that also gives you a GTM funnel that immediately you can go after the Selenium users who are actually start using you. We then enabled 32 more frameworks after that. Any smaller and bigger frameworks, you can write the test script and run on our cloud. Our business is not building a testing tool. Our business is automate the infra as much as possible. So the Nike of the world and the Burger King of the world are not going and setting up the test execution platform. So that's our market. So that is where we identify that do not reinvent the wheel. That is not our business. Build something on top of what is the best out in the market and make sure that you're going after them, after the users. The second important thing is that I never written a code, by the way, so I don't exactly. When I started, I sold the tech. I mean, I did the technology sales. I never written the code, but when I started building out team there, one thing I came to know that developers, they don't want to pay any tool. I mean, they feel challenged if they save the money. I mean, if they can save the money, they take it on ego that I have to solve it in the free cost. I don't want to pay. Until unless there is a storage involved, API calls are involved, or anything which not in their control actually. So we have to be very careful uh, when we are going after go to market. The managed services only comes when actually you're not a tech company. Sometime, I mean, if you ask a tech company to go for managed services, probably on the scale they might go, but initially they'll not go because they want to play around it. And they feel that, I mean, playing with these tools and platforms give them opportunity to learn faster. I mean, one case I can tell you, nobody in my team is ready to replace Grafana because that is open system. I mean, you cannot sell analytics to actually developers. That is something that we are figuring out that, okay, another tool that we are working on right now is enterprise segment. Managed services is the only way that you can go and sell to enterprises. So, but you have to open the open source model because you want adoption faster. That is the brilliant way to go after the market and adoption goes high. In SMBs, probably they don't want to pay you because they don't want the luxury tag immediately. Probably after certain years, they want to pay for it, then they'll go for managed services. So you have to be clear, like Yoga Bytes, you see Hasura is the same model. I mean, there are many products like that. So we have infra as a service where we don't have any open source. Another product we are building is an open source Compro model actually.
Fantastic. On that note, no, thanks for that, Asad. Jay and Tony would, I mean, we are in the last leg. Would love to understand from you what you believe that the competitive advantages of SaaS companies with a large consumerization element. What are the advantages they have when they are built out of India, especially when they're targeting a global base of end users? And where do you think we need to improve, and what advice do you have for founders building out of India, targeting the global end user base? Jay, why don't you go first, and then I would love to get Tony to go.
Yeah, look, as you mentioned in my introduction, I've been looking at investing in India into since 2007, right? And our thesis was that, hey, India has all of these great software developers, and there will be like these large companies coming out of India, software companies, because SaaS is global. And you can host your product anywhere in the world, and anybody in the world can access that. It's taken a little bit longer than I thought it would be. It's 13 years now, since we started. But you have companies like Fresh Desk coming out of there. You have companies like Lambda Test coming out of here. You have Postman out of here. You have Browser Stack out of here. So we are actually, and then I think a couple of things have changed. One is that when you first started in 2007, 2008, people who were looking, the product management talent wasn't here. I think it was more people that are used to doing projects, kind of, worked at, some of these outsourcing companies, and they really didn't understand, because being a product manager is an art, right? Because you kind of have 80%, you have to understand what the customer wants, and then the 20% you kind of have to put together, and what the customer is not telling you that they actually want, but you have to figure out that 20%. And that is something that is, it's a talent you can develop over time. So that was not there, and that has started kind of proliferating in India. And I kind of see that now. We haven't announced it. We have another large company, like a product-led growth company, that we have invested in, that should be announced in the next few days. But the other thing that has also happened, and I don't know if it's going to change now that the secret is out, is that a lot of these companies didn't always get the love of investors that you do in the Silicon Valley, or even in the US, where you go grow the company from 2 to like maybe 3 million, and all of a sudden you can raise $100 million, right? And that kind of makes you less efficient, and you can make a lot of mistakes, try different things to be successful. Most of the companies coming out of India in the SaaS side didn't have that luxury, because the Indian VCs were not really investing in SaaS. I think Blume and Excel India and maybe a few others were doing most of the SaaS investment, and I think that's going to change. But because of that limited capital, all of the companies, who are SaaS companies coming out of India, all had to be very efficient. And if you're going to be efficient, the only way you can do that is product-led growth, right? So my hope is that, now that there will be an influx of capital into Indian SaaS companies, that they don't lose this efficiency mantra that they have of trying to grow companies without spending a lot of capital.
Very interesting. Tony, would love to hear from you quickly, and then I would love to move to Asad to understand the challenges he's faced, because I'm sure he's faced a lot of them.
Yeah. I actually thinking, like, beside the tech community, first off, I'm a firm believer of Indian SaaS going global, right? But I do believe there are two things that this community might need to stand up together and lobby the government. I kind of feel the interest rate is way too high. As a result, there are not enough venture capital activities in India, and that leads to a second problem, is taxation. I heard that venture investment will be treated as income. That's actually very absurd in the rest of the world, but obviously I think that's still true in India, right? So that need to be changed. To some extent. And last but not least, I was thinking a community view. I was, when I was traveling India, I frequent coffee day a lot, and so when I realized the founder had taken his own life 2-3 years ago, that was a sad news, right? I think we need to treat a failure a little bit more. You invested money into a venture, and that's why it's called a venture. You should put the money in the bank if you can't take the hit, right? So you need to obviously do the due diligence, but if the venture fail, you need to have a good faith that you and the venture they both act at the best of interests, right? Obviously, you have lawyer for if that's not the case, right? I don't think I think the society need to be more tolerant on the failure, right? So I think looking from both U.S. and I think in China, I think they're more tolerant in terms of they understand sometimes it's just timing. It's not really you or me or the bad idea. It's just timing, period. 99% could just be timing, right? So understand that and give entrepreneur a much bigger chance to try and allow them to fail, right? And that will make this land become the SaaS capital. I truly believe because this is the language. English is the language, and with English comes with the workflow. Indian handles a lot of BPO operation for the world, right? Call centers, BPO operation, back office, right? A virtual assistant, they understand the workflow. And as we discussed, it's all about workflow efficiency improvement, right? That's one. Number two, you're talking about labor force. Labor force of customer service, programming. You can afford to push out the changes every single week versus let's say the same amount of budget you can only do once a month, right? I saw where the question from the audience say, hey, how do you manage those customization requests? I think if you stop putting your R&D in Silicon Valley and put in Bangalore or put in Pune, in some of those areas, when it makes sense, then yes, you can afford it, right? You can afford to balance it. I'm not saying every 100%, but the future workforce is remote, right? So you don't have to put in one place. That give you no more glory, or what the Chinese call it, like looking good face. Oh, I have office in Silicon Valley. Who cares? It's all in the Zoom right now, right? Who cares? Do you have office in Silicon Valley, right? So absolutely. Efficiency on the sales team, efficiency on the labor force. I think those are very important. So two problems with the government side. I believe the industry should lobby together, and the leadership should have some articles, soft leadership articles about, hey, how do we evaluate failure? Because that's where you go to the next one, right? To be more lenient, to be more open towards people tried and failed, right? And then I think number three is basically, COVID have given you the chance, this golden opportunity, just seize it. That's number three. Yeah.
Thanks, Tony. Asad, if you could quickly, I know I know you've faced a lot of challenges, but if you could quickly cover what are the challenges you face from a talent, go-to-market, funding point of view, and what are the biggest advantages you see building out of India? I know you can't cover this quickly because I know the kind of challenges you face, but quickly if you can cover it. Sorry about that, Asad. I would love to bring in Priya Rajan right after that. She has a question. Priya, if you can raise your hand, that'll be fantastic so that we can pull you into the panel. Go ahead, Asad.
So for us, I mean, we actually started at the right time. And I come from I started my career when actually people used to distribute software in the CDs, and deployments were very critical in the enterprise side, actually. I mean, back in 2005. So deployment was very tough. I mean, if you even think to build a software setting in India at that time in 2005, you needed an insane amount of capital to have even 10 customers on board. You need foot on the ground immediately. And you cannot build and distribute immediately. Cloud has given us the lever, actually. After 2010, is given opportunity. The basic problem is what to build, where to build, and actually how to distribute, and how will you spread the word to the audience, how to sell. So all these problems for our talent pool is solved now. That is why you are seeing the Hasura and the Postman, Browser Stack, Lambda Test, many more companies you will see come on board, because you can build from Bali and you can sell from Paris. I mean, this is the global opportunity. This is not a unique opportunity for anyone. We have advantage as a nation because we have an immense amount of talent pool available, skilled. We used to work for Google, Apple, and AWS in Hyderabad. Now you can build in Noida and you can build in Lucknow and ship it to San Francisco, whoever want to use it. So that's the only thing I actually know. My problems, most of the problems were solved because of the timing. We actually started at the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's rare to see dev tool companies. I mean, there are obviously exceptions, Postman, Hasura, and a bunch more, but and we are very confident you're on the right path to becoming really big. Thanks a lot. Priya, over to you. I know you have a question.
I think what Asad doesn't share that he's a hustler. I mean, end of the day, you have to hustle your way in. I mean, he is able to adapt kind of and evolve through this to make this happen. And he just addressed my last point. I was just going to ask, again, Sanjay's on it too, and Jay and Tony and Asad, you guys lived through this, both on the investor side and the founder side. My role is I get the pleasure to work with some of the best SaaS companies coming from India that expands into the US market. A lot of the names that Jay mentioned are great friends of mine, from all the way from when they incorporate a company to hopefully an IPO sometime soon, right? With that said, I think I was going to say last year has been anything. One thing that has taught us is, be ready for the inevitable, right? Like, so how has that changed both from a go-to-market perspective? One, I think Asad, you just touched on several of those points, meaning that there's no boundaries. But how does that change from a go-to-market perspective on how you sell to an enterprise customer in US, as more so to Jay? What is the most efficient way? How have you seen some of these kind of the best practices been adopted for the companies, folks who are listening in today?
So
Yeah, go ahead,
yeah.
Asad. Go.
So I'll start with that. I mean, yes, we didn't have enough capital to have foot on the ground and start enterprise sales. And when we started 2019, when we shipped our larger product in the market, bigger ticket size, the biggest problem was that product was not that mature. The stability on the cloud is very important, right? Security, stability, and then you need reliability. And you cannot build everything in 2 years. It takes time to actually mature the product. You're building a cloud. That was the point, but you cannot stop sales. I mean, you have to try. And there's no, I mean, myself and me and my partner both are coming from sales background. I mean, not a huge sales, but yes, in my last company, I was doing the sales actually, sitting right here in Noida and selling to Exomarine and App Dynamics. I mean, these kind of startups that I used to work. So we knew that there's one thing that we can try: tell the truth to the customer that you want to sell, and you need to win the trust of the customer, that okay, you are in trouble, you're not that insane scaled company, but yes, if you can win the trust and support from the customer, then I'm going to build it for you. That is the one thing which actually brought the Scholastics first customer on board from NYC. The QA director itself navigated along with us procurement, logistics, security, everything with a full blown trust. And we surrendered. We immediately surrendered that we are immature company. We just entered. We don't know how to do enterprise sales. If you can help us, we can deliver you best possible service. That was the first inflection point. And then we learned on the way how to win multiple deals on the enterprise side. So we got Microsoft in the same manner. We got Jesse Perry in the same manner. One, trust is the immense factor that you got to go and win the customer relationship fast, and then provide the services. Enterprise, it is working. Self-serve experience work actually. I mean, the moment they enter and they sign up, and the experience is working beautifully. Did I answer the question?
Beyond perfectly. Thank you. Jay, I know you had some thoughts on it.
Yeah, no. Look, I think it. First of all, the go-to-market probably differs a little bit depending on who you're selling to, right? So if you're trying to sell to like a more infrastructure developer, right? I don't think you ever have to now get out of Zoom because most of the sales. I think Tony mentioned this. You have to get the customer, but the real expansion when you get the large sale, you still have to win the love of the developer. And what we have seen in JFrog is like their best salespeople were actually customer support people. They actually train people, and these customer support folks were not like they were practically solution engineers because they were solving the end customer's problem, either a developer or an ops person, and they were able to upsell. So I think, and they were pulling down like over the phone. They were pulling down multi-million-dollar deals. These salespeople. So I almost think that look, at the end of the day, if you're selling to a customer 2 million, 3 million, you probably need to go and shake their hand at some point because that touch is still there. I think for more the what you may call it application-oriented software, enterprise software. You probably need to have enterprise sales team at some point to do the large expand, right? Because there you need to know how to navigate the the enterprise, maybe the procurement office, things like that. So as people get bigger and they start landing, say, like 100K, 200K kind of deals, it's always good to have a sales team that you start putting down in US. Much more, maybe they're mostly on their Zoom or in working from home, but at least they have the ability to kind of fly out and meet the customer once in a while.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah. Anirvan, I just want to come in just 30 seconds. I see our friend Manish again. Manish clearly loves B2B and loves this. Manish, good to see you. I think Asad was talking about, from Noida to Nevada, in a sense, that's what, some of folks are equipping. We were thinking of having him on both the panels, on product-led growth and on GTM. But Jay, I think your point, what is interesting, it's the sequencing, right? In the sense that a lot of startups maybe start, you raise capital and you start marketing it, versus if you really build the product and then you sequence the GTM after that, right? It's the product-led growth is driving that. Of course, you need the distribution channel. And it also, I think Anant earlier was talking about trust, and Tony, I think, bring up a really interesting point. And essentially, that's what sales or PLG is trust, right? Can they really trust your product, and will they use it when you don't have that brand name? So, just interesting themes. Back to you, Jitesh. How are we doing on time? Manish is back here. Thank you, Priya. Thanks. Good to great to see you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Priya. Manish, why don't you go ahead with your next question? And after that, Jitesh has one question for Tony.
Yeah, we have one person in the audience, Abhishek, as well, who I'm going to bring up, who'll ask the question. I'll wait there.
Okay, Manish, go ahead.
I'm going to keep it super quick. Since Asad mentioned Nevada, I can ask the A-rated question. We're all adults here. Jay, the question is for you. Sapphire has done amazing things. I'm not going to start counting, but definitely you guys are a wet dream for focused investors. My question is a bit nuanced. When you look back to your best returns yielding investment, and then the most fun investment as a board member, as a lead partner yourself, are they the same or are they different? And if they're different, which is my hope, the answer is it's different. Just with the benefit of hindsight, tell us that, did you know when you invested, or what point in the journey did you know?
So I don't want to mention names, right? Because they're all kind of, it's like all my children in some ways are portfolio companies, right? You're investors, so you know that, right? You can't in public tell what you like. But I'll tell you, the one thing that has, for me at this stage in my career, working with entrepreneurs is what makes me get up in the morning, right? And the thing that kind of, as an investor who are on this panel, you all know that you actually don't spend the most time with the companies that are doing really well. It is typically the companies that are not doing well where you spend probably 80% of your time. Because, the companies who are doing well, they kind of come to you, they mostly have figured it out. They say, hey, we have 2 or 3 options. Which one do you think will work? And you kind of give them some direction, but they're off and running, right? So you're actually less kind of involved. So for me, I think some of the companies where you spend a lot of time, companies not doing well, and then they become like a massive kind of success, is kind of probably gives you the most amount of success, right? I'll mention that Caltrix was one of those things. When we invested, we were the first institutional investor. Nobody really had heard about this whole data prep kind of thing. The company 1 year actually only had, like in its initial, right, the year after we invested, I think had 4 or 5 new customers, right? And they existed on upsell, as Tony said, that saved the day for them. But now they're like, a massive kind of success as being in the BI space, right? And I always kind of remember the days that things were not working, trying to figure out. Those kind of gives you the most satisfaction versus, things are always going. Like JFrog had always been successful, even when we were investing. I'll admit, I didn't always understand what the hell they were doing, this Artifactory, even though I was a developer. But it was working really well. They had this great product-led growth strategy. The numbers were off the charts. And I spent a lot of time with Shlomi and the team as they kind of went through the whole process of becoming public. but it wasn't, like they didn't go through a huge bump where they had to you had to roll up your sleeves, and so it's satisfying, and I'm really proud of our investment and what Shlomi has achieved. But it's not that feeling you always get that, hey, I figured things out. So I don't know, Manish, if I gave you the answer to your question.
Well done. Thank you.
Thanks, Manish. Abhishek, you're up.
Thanks, Ritesh. Well, I am actually out for my evening work, so you won't be able to see my face. So I'll just jump right into my question. This is for Tony. So, Tony, well, we have seen, the launch of mixed reality and Unreal Engine, which is pretty futuristic, and you having a front row seat to everything RTE. Could you tell us more about, what sort of applications do you see Agora powering in the future? You've been talking about, learning from your customers, how they are leveraging the Agora platform. Maybe if you could share, what's the future like.
Are you talking about specifically on the mixed reality side of it, or everything?
Mixed reality, yes.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, I think metaverse is a keyword. Everybody, everybody pitching to the investor, right? And I think there are some element into it. However, I think it's still a little bit further technology. That's a long way to go, right? The network, the synchronization, and the device, right? So there's a lot of dependency on that one. However, we do see some of those early version of those more like a 2D, less demanding on certain glass. I think those might came first. The latest example would be those, the social app like audio, dropping audio app, right? The Clubhouse. That kind of combination of social and content is actually very interesting, right? I mean, there are articles out there saying predict that may or may not be able to sustain, but actually, I actually think it will. In my personal opinion, it may not be a horizontal one, but I believe every niche vertical you could have something like that, right? In the future apps, the future community, whether you call this, really don't have to be huge, don't have to be another Facebook. And I believe it won't be a Facebook. It will probably going to be a couple million user, but die-hard user, right? The whole project will thrive based on content, community, and commerce. When you directly tie the user needs into the supply, which efficiently cut off all the middlemen, right? That give enough transaction value to backing the community up, right? Without depend on the ad income, which we know is very small, right? And I think that's actually one of the biggest challenge that is Indians facing. Easy to get the AU, hard to maintain, and even harder to monetize from it, right? So that's I think is one thing. The other thing is if you look at where the communication, or let's define the communication in a broader term, right? When we have Skype, communication means utility based off your address book, right? But let's say you go to ShareChat, Clubhouse, the future of communication no longer point to point. It's no longer utility. I mean, you don't really need any of those apps I would just mentioned, right? You have a phone, right? But you go there more often. Similar apps, you go there more often because communication became a higher level needs. You already satisfied your hunger, right? Your physical needs, right? So now you actually want to, we're here basically. We are here to exchange ideas with like-minded people who interest in a certain topic, right? And this communication is no longer point to point. It's really a whole network, right? The network-based communication is going to taking over, right? And it's going to be all going to be embedded in the environment. Imagine when this meeting finished, everybody who attend this one still together, and we can add each other's profile, and we can continue to discuss this B2B topic, right? There's a lot can be done. The value when you're moving from point-to-point address book utility-based communication to a network-based communication, the value of the network increased by so much, right? So you no longer need a Skype user base of 100, 200 million. You need maybe 1 or 2 million, maybe even 10. In 10 million is enough, right? So yeah. I'm actually very back to Indian, right? I'm a firm believer of ABCD. I'm yet to see the real-time engagement being applied to those fields and something coming out of it. So I think we're at the beginning of whole thing.
Yes, indeed.
Wow.
very fascinating. Thank you so much. But I can, clearly tell from my experience, there are a lot of startups which are building on top of Agora in the healthcare, taking it to the rural and the most remote areas of India. So I pretty think, it's going to get more transactional. But yeah, thank you for your views there.
Fantastic, multi-directional and ubiquitous. So on that note, Sanjay, why don't you?
Dinesh, are we done? One more question.
Yeah, we'll take one more. Thanks a lot, Abhishek. Tony, just for context, Abhishek is one of our colleagues. He works for one of our sister funds, Arca Venture Labs. Samod, I'm just promoting you if you're here. Just promoting you.
And I hope Jay, Tony, Asad, you'll have.
Yeah, we'll just take this as last question. Thanks a lot, guys. We just wanted to keep this as the last one. There are two, three more. Yeah, the 2-3 more which I'm going to keep for later. We'll cover that. But Samod, would you like to go ahead, please?
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you all. Thank you, Jay. Would allow your point about product-led sales. So just curious about one particular thing, which is how do you take this into, for example, a regulated market like banking and fintech? And have you seen that scaling in such domains? You're talking about, for example, C3 AI, for example, right? Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? And have you seen success in terms of initially taking it as a product-led sales in here and later on maybe moving to enterprise sort of way?
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely right. When you talk about banking and fintech, the neobanks, as we call them, they are kind of product-led growth, although they are direct to consumer, right? So we are, investors in one of those like called Current. So they're going, they have a network effect. They kind of do that. But then on the infrastructure side, look, there's a big, great example, Stripe. Whatever, $95 billion market, valuation, 100, I don't know where they ended up. That is all product-led growth. And that is a fintech company. And they basically kind of didn't even have a open source, but they kind of like what Agora does, solved a really, really critical problem really, really well. And now, they're ubiquitous, right? Like if you start a company, it doesn't matter whether it's B2B or B2C, you will most likely use Stripe, right, for something in your thing. So absolutely, we can go down the road, but it's just the same way. It's just that is the pain point that you're solving for infrastructure large enough, and can you bring a solution that is easy enough for even a developer, right? A developer, I said 15 minutes for an end consumer. I think a developer, like if they take more than 20 minutes to understand what you're doing, and they can't just make like 10 calls, and not even 10, maybe like 5 calls to get going, they're not going to use your API and move on, right? Initial, right? Of course, after that, when they put it into the application and they do other things with it, then they might spend more time to understand what they're doing. But so yeah, I think it works in fintech also.
Got it. One minor addition, sorry. How about selling to banks, etc., especially if you want to sort of tie in with your data lake?
Selling to banks, yeah. So look, I think there you're going to have more of an issue, right? Because the banks are old enterprise, and they are, so you kind of have to figure out, if you're trying to sell to fintech, what is their pain point and what they're going to do. And in that case, maybe an open source model actually works a lot better, right? So we have a company called Tetrad, which is in the service mesh area, and they basically sell to a lot of fintechs, but they are kind of being deployed, but they have a open source Istio, so they are basically the company behind Istio, and they are kind of going in there, finding a kind of a land where people are moving their applications from on-prem to the cloud, right? And they need to use service mesh to kind of manage the application. So you can do that. You can have a product-led or maybe an open source model for larger enterprises. And that is where open source actually works a little bit better when you kind of are re-architecting somebody's application or asking somebody to kind of build an application on top of what you're providing.
Very interesting. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Samud.
Sanjay, parting words.
Yeah,
I
sure.
think.
So, Jai, Tony, and Asad, I think we need a round two of this. We could have just extended this, but I want to say is, I think we had by far one of the most questions, and I think they're still not done. Jitesh is still collecting them. So, Tony and Jai, thanks for dialing from San Francisco. Asad, from here. Tony, it's very interesting. I was just thinking of the takeaways. I think we all sometimes get lost in the Parmesan cheese, and he's saying that you've got to first cook the pasta, and the pasta itself has got to be good, right? Everything else is just frills on top, and that doesn't really hide your product. And the second analogy is product Jedis. We're just talking about you have Jedi Masters, and you really have your products as your lightsabers. So very interesting. I think avatars to think about. Thanks a lot for spending time with us. This is the second of our B2B evening. And it was an incredible learning session. I think Jitesh Hariman, we're taking notes, and it's going to be on Twitter, and then we're going to share. I think it was also live on YouTube. Thanks a lot for extending the time, and Anirvan, fantastic job, and Jitesh, thanks for all the work behind.